Welcome to the Get Emergent podcast. The Get Emergent podcast guides leaders to creatively strengthen relationships and improve performance of their leadership and those that they lead. We like to provide concepts and ideas that you can turn into pragmatic experiments to help you develop your higher potential in your work and in your leadership. Hopefully, you're going to find some better practices to apply directly to your work. I'm Bill Berthel.
I'm Jeremiah Polson.
So Jeremiah, I know you have a brief reading to share with us in this space of relating takes practice.
I do. I've been reading through the book Culture Code, or The Culture Code by Daniel Coyle. Great book. If you haven't read it, check it out. Really cool tool. And I couldn't help but connect today's topic with what I was reading in chapter 4. Daniel Coyle calls Greg Popovich the relationship maker. And here's why. I'm reading right from chapter 4 here, so just a brief piece. He says, a while back, a writer named Neil Payne set out to determine who was the best National Basketball Association coach for the modern era. He devised an algorithm that used player performance metrics to predict how many games a team should win. He crunched numbers for every NBA coach since 1979 in order to measure wins above expectations, which is basically the number of times a coach's team won a game that measured their players' skills that had no business winning. He then plotted the results on a graph, right? And he goes on to say that Greg Popovich's team had won 117 more games than they should have based on their team's skill level and competency. So the reason he calls, and I won't continue reading the chapter, obviously, if you want to dig in deeper, go get it for yourself. But they essentially said Popovich's success was impossible. But the one way that he got to that level of success was by building relationships with the people on the team that were outside of the function of basketball. He even went so far as to learn the different languages that his team spoke and showed up in a way that first, before any conversations around performance on the court, he would ask questions about the person's personal life, the connection between their personality, how they're feeling about the game, versus how they performed in the game. So there's a very present practice of him taking the time to meaningfully connect with the team members on multiple occasions so that the culture of the team became one of open sharing, vulnerability, and safety around how they were feeling as they stepped into the court. He would go on to say, even in the book, that that was the secret sauce, if you will, of their victories. Even when they were outmatched competency-wise and skills-wise, they were able to defeat opponents because of the way they acted selflessly and meaningfully towards each other relationally.
Wow. So the outcome of these practices of relating from the coach, I imagine that went on through the team as well. How could it not, is being attributed for their much higher than expected performance. In this case, is a high number of wins that statistically, analytically, they didn't deserve.
Absolutely. To that point of the trickle-down effect into the culture of the players, there would be, if you read the history on this team, there would be players coming to his team that had been somewhat incompliant and obtrusive to other team cultures.
Yeah.
They come onto his team and all of a sudden they start changing in a way that they are adjusting to the culture, so much so that they become the most selfless passers on the court. And certain other all-stars in the league would go on to say that when you play against Popovich's team, they do things that don't make sense because they're not taking the shot. They're actually passing it when you don't expect them to pass it because they want the other guy to get the point. They want to support and supply the spotlight to the other team members. And so to the average eye, it looked wildly out of the high-performing team character, but it was that act of servant leadership, that act of meaningful connection, even on the court, that led to their success.
The practice of relationships.
Yeah.
You know, and probably most of our listeners at this point knows that I'm not a sports guy, so I did not know that story. What it's bringing up for me is the fictional space of Ted Lasso, right? Another sports story, but fictional, right? Of really instilling first belief on the team there in the Ted Lasso story, but really in believing in one another and having those relationships and doing the work, right? Part of the practice is the fundamental of the skills for that sport or the craft or the industry we're in, right? In the workplace. But it requires the practice of relating and really putting that into action with one another.
Yeah. And it's not the absence of the direct communication or the sharpening of the competencies. It's not the absence at the expense of the relationship. It's both and. It's a hard approach, putting in the time, putting in the training, putting in the strength training, whatever it is, while at the same time building the relationships as an equal priority.
Yeah, well, with this episode as our third part of a three-part series, we previously talked about that idea of discovery, of getting more awareness of self in an emotional social intelligence kind of framework using personality. And then we went into the second episode where we really talked about kind of the social aspects of emotional intelligence, the emotional social side of tuning into others, recognizing other people's feelings, thoughts, emotions, as much as we can. We're not mind readers, but we can read quite a bit about what other people are preferring, thinking, doing, feeling. This is putting it all into action. This is taking that discovery and that recognition of other people's styles and really setting up the experiments that we can practice to be more effective in those relationships and in our work with other people.
Yeah, there's something to be said for building a habit around the opportunities already available to us. You can take everything we've talked about, and if you don't make it part of your regular ongoing practice, it will stay on a shelf somewhere, like a book you once read and you might remember every once in a while. So the hard work that we're talking about today is how do we put this into practice? How do we create
Absolutely
a habit routine of some sort so that our learning now becomes our behaving?
And it really is habits. You're hitting the nail right on the head, right? With the more contemporary research in personality shows that personality is not set. We are not, quote unquote, hardwired in a particular way. Yes, we absolutely have very strong tendencies. We have familiarities from our upbringing. There's probably genetics in play, right? It's nature and nurture here. But personality is absolutely trainable, adaptable. We can be agile, especially when we set the intention to create these experiments to start. Well, I like to use the word tweak. We start tweaking a piece at a time to see what really works and what doesn't in certain relationships and certain situations.
Yeah, it's been a high hope for me and a gladness that EQ is something that can be developed, because I've heard that IQ is not.
Exactly.
So I've never taken an IQ test, but I'm grateful that no matter where that is, I can develop these strengths of emotional intelligence and the quotients related to them. So
I guess your IQ number is higher than you're giving yourself credit for, but you're right that IQ is fairly set in our formidable years. That does not mean we know everything we're going to know as a 6-year-old. That is not what I'm saying.
yeah,
The capacity for that IQ does have a fairly set ceiling. We can always learn more information. We can get more factoids. We can even learn a new language or learn to use a musical instrument. That's not really affecting the overall intelligence quotient that we have from an IQ perspective. EQ, however, shows that we can continue to stretch that, move that, grow that, develop our EQ throughout our whole lifespan. Yes, as we age, neuroplasticity is different. We might learn a little differently, but it's always growable. That's probably the argument for that's the place to invest your time, your energy, your experiments, your practice.
Yeah. So talk about that a little bit more. That's where we are. So what are the things that you're thinking when you talk about the practice, the development? What are the key components of growing that level of emotional intelligence, of putting that behavior into action?
So it starts with awareness of self, right? It really does. It's kind of, I worked with an amazing coach several years ago. I worked with her for 3 years, had her coach me. She was my coach. And she would always remind me, this was her words, Bill, it's an inside job. So first, it's an inside job, meaning really starts with me, my perspective, my awareness, right? So first it's an inside job. It starts with the discovery of who am I? How do I think, behave, act, and maybe a little bit of why. We don't have to dig into that too much, but we want an understanding of what it is, kind of current state. So what are my preferences? What's my personality? What are my mindsets given specific contexts and situations?
Gotcha.
Really starts there, self-awareness, right? Then it moves into awareness of others, right? How do I tune in, really recognize how other people operate, and not focusing on differences, but really focusing on how diverse we are, how it is we are different. But it's less about that differential, but more about, oh, there's something else there that
Yeah.
maybe is less familiar with me. Probably not completely ignorant of, but less familiar, maybe sometimes less comfortable. So it helps to give a situation. This is more IQ than EQ, but sometimes, an analogy works really well. I never considered myself a math guy, right? Like I sometimes joke, with the team that numbers are these arbitrary symbols that the meaning changes every time I look at them, right? I'm a
Yeah.
math guy. Well, part of that is it starts with me. It's an inside job. That's my inner dialogue. I know why. My brother, who I grew up closest with, is like a human calculator, Jeremiah. I
Yeah.
never had to be good at math. If he was nearby, all I'd have to do is, yell, "Hey, Michael, what's 92 times 7?" And boom, like faster than I could get a calculator out, right? So that shaped me in a certain way, right? So that's from an IQ perspective, perhaps in a way that I'm not
Huh.
so mathematically inclined. Same thing
Okay.
with my personality, right? My environment is part of what shaped me. What has worked for me to make me really successful or not. Things I've done where it's like, ouch, that didn't work, right?
Hmm.
Has shaped my personality. The beauty about personality, we can keep growing it. We can keep adjusting it if we have this willingness to step in
Yeah. So it starts with this recognition of where we are
of self.
of self. It's an inside job, which can mean so many different things, right? Like
Yeah,
it's,
right.
um,
And it
and
did
then,
with my coach. Let me tell you, it meant a lot of things for me.
and then it comes to this place of like, okay, so now what's my desired picture of the future? What is that future reality of this relationship that I want? And how do I get there? So the practice seems to be recognizing where it starts and then also doing the work to refine the picture of the vision of the future and then moving from where you are in relationship either to yourself or others in a way that gets you there.
Absolutely. And I really appreciate the way you share that it's a visioning process of a future. Now, we could hold the paradigm of, I want the future to be exactly like it is. I want it from my perspective.
Yeah.
It's valid. It is a choice, right? We can absolutely do that. And in some situations, we're absolutely right doing that.
Mm-hmm.
It's not about acquiescing to every situation. It's not about being completely flexible all over the place. We're not chameleons. We're not going to just take on the color of our surrounding foliage. That's not the way it works for us. There are times where you're absolutely right approaching it the way you're doing it. However, if we're rigid, and that's mostly what we do or always what we do, right?
For all relationships.
Yeah, in
Yeah.
all situations,
Yeah.
right? All people, all situations, we hold that kind of rigid, maybe single-minded kind of stance. That's limiting. That really is.
Yeah. Where I hear that a lot, and I don't know if we'll get some comments on this in either affirmation or correction, but I hear that a lot with leaders who are training up the next generation.
Yeah.
And essentially they're saying, I was taught this way. This is how I came up.
Oh, yeah.
And why don't they get it like I got it? Why don't they?
Sure.
I'm doing everything that worked for me. Why aren't they getting it? And it doesn't necessarily have to be age associated. It could just be new hires or a new person to the team,
Sure.
somebody who's transferring in. This is how I learned it. I'm teaching them the same way. What's wrong with them? And there's this rigidity to the process of building the relationship as if everybody learns the same way, as if everybody has the same mindset as I do. Now, if that ruffles your feathers a little bit, I'm glad a little bit, so let it bristle you and start thinking about what does it mean? How do I adjust? How do I maybe create a picture of the future and work towards it differently if I'm open to it?
It's really interesting. It brings up a story for me around past role, helping getting more diverse teams and really diverse in thought at that point in time was the mindset. Because what we noticed was our hiring managers were kind of just hiring people that were more like them in thought, in education. This was before any type of DEI initiative. We just found incredibly homogenous teams forming because our hiring managers were hiring people that were just like them. Why was that important? Because these teams were no longer functioning as well as they may have, especially as they grew. They were lacking an ability to innovate. They were lacking an ability to challenge themselves because they were just far too homogenous. And so what we started doing, this was some of my early use of a DISC instrument. We started using a DISC instrument in the recruitment process, not as a decision maker, but as a tool to better understand some of our candidates and how they maybe approached work differently, how they behaved
Yeah.
differently. And then to use that strategically in the interviewing process to be able to better ask more intelligent questions of those candidates and get some other ways of thinking, other creative elements onto teams. And it worked. Let me tell you, those teams, as they became more diverse that way, really performed much better. That was an experiment we had to run, right?
Yeah.
That was really an
Yeah.
experiment we had to run to see if it would work.
Yeah. There's experiments we can run even personally before we get into those department wide or business sector wide experiments. We're
Yeah,
starting with the personal experiment.
absolutely.
I ran an experiment once
Yeah.
personally that made me very uncomfortable. I'm one of those that's more, or I have been in the past, more rigid, especially in relationship to my children. So I've got
Okay.
3 kids, 22 right now, 16 and 18. And I wasn't satisfied with the nature of the relationship between me and one of my daughters. And I thought I need to work harder to see things from her perspective. So
Yeah.
I settled in to not giving any response and really just ask questions. And this is mainly while we were in the vehicles. Anytime I decided
Okay.
running an experiment when we're shoulder to shoulder, driver seat,
Good.
passenger seat, I'm not going to give any responses. I'm just going to experiment with questions, acknowledgments, validations of her perspective, and see what I can learn. And so in the car, I recognized almost an immediate change in the temperature of the room. By that, I mean posture, openness, and even afterward, getting feedback from her saying, that was a great conversation. Thank you for listening. And my intent was to simply hear things from her perspective by applying some of what we've been talking about. And I can't tell you how exponentially helpful that little experiment with one of the closest people in my life has
Awesome.
been with all of those that I work with on a regular basis outside of the house, right? So experiments can be very different based on your context. Starting small or close to home could be the best way to begin, right?
Absolutely. And what congratulations on that first, right? Having the awareness that that's a place that you wanted a shift, right, in the relationship.
Mm-hmm.
Some of us will be aware of that and then not take that next step to then recognize in your story what your daughter might need in some of those moments, right? Putting that into action, which is really what we're talking about, right? So you discovered, you recognized, then you set up some activity, right? Some experiment. I used to work in the research and development space, and I learned a little bit about designs of experiment. And one of the fundamentals, one way to look at designs of experiment is to understand all of the variables that are at play and only change one of them at a time when you run that experiment. And what's really important in that is we get to either subtract or add one variable at a time into the experiment and see how it affects the overall system,
Mm-hmm.
right? So if we're making cookies and we change one ingredient and keep everything else the same, right? The environment, the temperature of the oven, we then get to find out how does the cookie change in the end by
Yeah.
that one variable. It's really similar in this space of experimenting with what I want to call it is an emotional intelligence experiment, right? It
Yeah.
becomes usually a social experiment because we're going to involve other people or a group of people. But we can even just start with ourselves. We can start at that, it's an inside job level. Know that I like to show up a certain way in this type of situation. What if I just changed one piece like you did? You stopped responding.
Yeah.
You knew that about yourself. Your preference was to respond,
Mm-hmm.
but you chose to just change that one dynamic first of not responding,
Yeah.
one variable at a time.
Yeah. And as we're talking about experiments and variables and even the relating takes practice, it seems as though we're saying, wow, okay, inside that practice, there's going to be experiments.
Yes,
Inside that practice, there's also going to be a required set of goals so that you can verify the movement forward in the relationship. And I think sometimes we juxtapose in a not so helpful way relationship to achievement.
yes.
And relationship isn't the absence of achievement, it's
Nope.
actually the beautiful combination of both. And so setting a goal for a relationship doesn't mean you're being overly formulaic. It actually means you're valuing that relationship and the achievement of both. So I love the idea of setting a verifiable goal in the midst of that relationship that you can be enthusiastic about, set a time frame for, even go through our vital process of, what does it
Absolutely.
mean to set a goal that's even limitless by default?
your goal was an improved relationship with one of your daughters, right? My
Absolutely.
silly example was, I guess, a better cookie, right? Or whatever.
Yeah.
We have that goal in mind. I think sometimes we want to race to that end point, right? We change a lot, or we think we have to be something completely different.
Right.
Probably not the case. It's probably a small tweak or two. Run
Yeah.
that experiment for a long enough time, right? Your sample size needs to be big enough. Don't give up too quickly on the experiment.
Yep.
And then really kind of measure and reflect, how did that work? And then there's an opportunity to ramp up the experiment, right? I like to think of kind of three different levels of practice or experimentation. I think it's, first starting with a basic, a fundamental change, maybe something, I don't want to call it simple because it might not be easy, but it's kind of at that first level. It probably wasn't easy for you to stop responding, but it was something in your control and it was kind of fundamental for you, right? So it's kind of at that
Yeah.
first level, right?
Yeah.
Sounds like a second level or a second thing you recognize in that was like, let's do that in the car. Let's just control the environment in a way, right?
Yes. To your point, it's a small tweak of a pre-existing
Yeah.
context that I can manageably change on a regular basis. To me, it was energetically expensive for me, but it was also an incremental shift in the way we
Yes.
dialogue. So it was something I could do in a small way daily over the course of time that I could see it making a difference.
And I bet you're now operating at that third level of the experiment where the environment probably doesn't matter as much. You could probably do it most anywhere. You've got the first variable. I'm going to give you credit and say mastered. Yeah, probably you mess up once in a while. You're human, but I bet you got that mastered, right?
Well,
You can take it out of the car and probably do it in the living room or in the grocery store if you're with your daughter. Wherever you are, you
yeah,
can probably get it to that third. I'm going to call that the more advanced, right? So you got this like beginner, intermediate, and advanced kind of tiers of experimentation. My point in this is, let's not stop at the beginner level. Keep nudging it. Now, the second piece, what would you choose? Would you change the environment? Would you expand to other people? What would you do? That third level. Can I do it anywhere, everywhere? Can I do it with the most challenging people in my life, right? Don't race to that third level. If you're going to run the experiment at the third level to begin with, I don't know, maybe you're lucky and you'll do it, but start at the lower hanging fruit and build up.
and giving yourself permission to start with that low hanging fruit is a really important piece of it,
Yeah.
right? Just not
That's
feeling like
good
you
work.
gotta, yeah,
That's good
it's
work.
probably the most powerful work you're doing.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because you don't get to the expert or by the way, you'd have to ask my daughter to see if I'm progressing at all. And I know
Exactly.
context. Actually, this is becoming kind of a coaching conversation for me because I'm realizing, oh, geez, I could move it out of the car. So thanks, Bill. But it's all right to start small and incrementally adjust along the way to reach
Yeah.
those higher levels. Yeah. I'll tell you what it also does. And I think this is true in any space where you're practicing something new is it gives you a new and different awareness of when it's not happening around you.
Yeah, absolutely.
So you'll start to notice things that you start to recognize and be aware of the absence of certain things as you're practicing new things. It might be uncomfortable. You start to get, I would say uncomfortable with the absence of it in other relationships. I'm moving away from even personal experience here, but I think there's a reasonable and important recognition that once you start doing something new and you get good at it, there's going to be times where you start to get rubbed the wrong way by those who aren't practicing it. So how do you approach that? How do you approach those in your circles and in your report lines that you now need to become the trainer for in these areas?
So stuff will shift, right? Like that's my silly way of like just netting that out is, as we become more agile, as we run these experiments, as we show up differently in our relationships in the workplace, some will embrace that and some might not. Or in the middle of maybe embracing and not embracing is maybe some folks won't know what to do with it, or they might be a little confused, right?
Mm-hmm.
I think socializing it is the best thing to do.
What do you mean?
Well, with those that we can say, Jeremiah, I'm going to be running this experiment, man. I'm probably going to be showing up differently. I'd love it if you played an objective observer when you can. Give me some feedback. Let me know how I'm doing at this. I really want to change the way I show up in our group meetings, might be my declaration to you. I'm going to socialize that with you. And I'm going to ask you to, just notice it if you could for me. And I might come around and ask for some feedback. Just making that public declaration by socializing it starts putting people on notice. It's not like, oh, why is Bill acting weird and different? I don't know. He's actually running this experiment. He's trying to do something purposefully. Socialize it.
So the first step is deciding what small thing you want to change in some
Yep.
way in practice of relationship, but then also being open with those around you to share that intent for the purpose of getting feedback, but also there's some cultural ripple effect that happens there too, where it becomes
Absolutely.
normal and accepted to look outside yourself for relationship practice.
So a way we do this in much of our EI training, whether that be a kind of an EI for leaders, our kind of higher level emotional social competency inventory based emotional intelligence training, we have our everyday EI work that we do as well. We suggest to the participant, the person we have in the classroom or the person we're coaching, to socialize it with their leader at minimum. Socialize it with their manager. It's usually their sponsor, right, who's asking them to come do this work or making the investment for them financially. But it's not out of respect of that financial investment. It's actually for that support. It's for that, I'm going to say, quote unquote, public declaration, at least with your leader. So he or she can also kind of have your back too. So if there is any like weirdness going on the team because you're showing up a little differently,
Yeah.
and they've got your back. But hey, if you can socialize it with a few trusted teammates too, I think triangulate it. Get 3 people around you with it.
Yeah.
Your
Yeah.
manager or leader, and a couple teammates. Maybe it's not the low hanging fruit sometimes. Maybe it's the guy on your team you have some of the most challenge with. And just be able to say, I know once in a while we have a little friction, but this is the thing I want to do for our team. Could you partner with me? And explain to them what you're trying to do. Trying to show
Yeah.
up differently when we have group conversations. I'm trying to not respond as much. Or maybe it's the opposite. I'm trying to bring my authentic voice, and maybe you'd encourage me to speak up more. Whatever it is you're trying to do, partner up with the people around you.
Yeah. Yeah. That's really the magic of the discovery, recognition, and action all put into one moment of being open about that work that you're doing and inviting feedback and support along the way. Sounds like a great place to punctuate all three of these conversations. Is what do you do to take this to the next level? Socialize it, give it space in your connections with other people as you discover more about yourself and as you recognize it in others. Now take time to have those conversations when
Yeah.
you're ready to move forward to a better picture of the future.
I want to recognize you've got 2 more extroverted guys on this call than being introverted, right? So this is not
Yes.
as easy for some folks or as familiar or as ready for some folks that might either identify as or that they know that they are more introverted. The reason I say identify as because it's amazing how many folks I do work with that say I'm an introvert and it turns out they're really not. They misunderstand what that is, right? So that introversion isn't that you're not able to be social. It's not that you don't like social situations. You don't get as much energy from that. It's a bigger energetic spend to socialize. Those of us that are a little bit more on the extroversion side, we get energized by doing that, right? So it's pretty quick for me. I'm not a strong extrovert, but I'm on the extroverted side of things. It's not too hard for me to say, oh, I'll tell Jeremiah what I'm doing. I'll ask for his help. That might alone be part of your experiment and awesome. Push into that a little bit, not to make you an extrovert, but it's a worthy place of the investment of your energy to get that support from outside of yourself.
Really important. And I would say some of the most self declared and evidentially introverted folks I know are the best outward communicators I know as well. So sometimes there's this sense of like, I can't do this, or maybe even I shouldn't, or something like that, that gets into the internal criticism. But yeah, give yourself the grace and space to approach this action, this practice in whatever way makes most sense for you from where you're sitting at the table.
Yeah, love it.
Since we're talking about introversion, extroversion, I'm thinking we should do a whole podcast on this, Bill.
We definitely can. We definitely
Yeah.
can. Yeah, with this being the third part in a 3-part series, and we're really talking about the full composite or the accumulation of the awareness pieces of discovery, the social pieces of recognizing, all in that emotional social intelligence space. That alone, I think we could judge as worthy and maybe even beautiful. But we're really talking about action here. We're
Yeah.
talking about turning these awareness pieces into behaviors because that's where the rubber meets the road. In your opening reading about the basketball team, it was about those over 100 wins that they didn't deserve. They wouldn't have had. It's about results. It really is. This isn't just nice to have. It's not just about being a nice person. It's not a soft skill. These are actually differentiating pragmatic skills that, when put in place, increase the performance of yourself, your team, and your organization. And that's the reason we're talking about it here today.
Yeah, absolutely. And study after study shows that the higher the level of emotional intelligence that the team leader has, the higher the performance of the team itself.
Absolutely.
So there's a direct correlation between the leadership's capacity to be self-aware and others aware and managing those to the bottom line output of the team, whatever that bottom line is measured by. The soft skills approach to me is like, wait, have you not checked the stats lately? This is powerful stuff towards the achievement side of things just as much as it is towards the relationship. It pays to be honorable in your relationship.
Yeah. You've inspired me actually to respond less. I've been working over the past few years to speak up more, and I'm feeling like I may have turned the dial a little too far. I don't know that to be true, but I'm feeling that way a little bit. And so my action out of today's conversation is to get just a little bit more aware of that. Before I start dialing it back, I'm going to get a little bit more aware of that. Am I responding either too quickly first, or where I don't need to respond at all? Because the last thing I want to do is take up the space from somebody else being able to do that or do it better than I'm going to do it. That's my action out of today. I don't want to put you on the spot, but I'm going to. Got any action out of today?
Yeah, I'm going to hold you accountable to that.
Good. Thank you. That's another reason to share it with you and all of our esteemed listeners.
In all seriousness, and I mean that, as we are at Emergent, always available to one another to
absolutely
nudge each other on. But I think for me, there really was genuine awareness made when you started talking about the beginner, middle, and expert levels. I forget the language you used there, but specifically, I want to practice that skill of listening, acknowledging, validating, exploring outside of the car.
Yeah.
And I think I can do a lot better work there now that I've kind of achieved some success in that space, literally expanded a little bit, and in other ways too. I think that there's people that activate me that are on the other side of certain perspectives that I could definitely benefit from practicing that art more with.
Awesome. Jeremiah, thank you for this conversation.
Oh, thank you. I love it.
And thanks for listening, folks. We hope you enjoyed this episode and that you're looking forward to more. You can listen to a new podcast 2 times every month here at Get Emergent or wherever you listen to your podcasts. And we sure hope you picked up something you're going to apply or use in your leadership and your work right away. Let us know how that goes by reaching out to support@getemergent.com or directly to myself or Jeremiah. Thanks for listening.